My dad once told me I wasn't cut out for the big leagues. I can still see his face when he said it, his voice low and almost disappointed, like I was some sort of failed experiment. My family always treated me like the forgettable child, the one who would never make a name for themselves, the one who'd be lucky to just get by. They'd sit around the dinner table, talking about their business ventures and big plans, while I was just background noise. My older brother was always their star, the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was constantly reminded that I didn't have the killer instinct for business, that I wasn't tough enough to survive in their world. For years, I believed them. I carried that weight on my shoulders like a curse, thinking maybe they were right, maybe I was destined to be small. But something inside me snapped the day my father said those words to my face. Not cut out for the big leagues. It burned into my memory, a scar that I carried quietly. I didn't scream or argue back. Instead, I decided to disappear for a while, to stop trying to prove myself to people who had already written me off. I took a low-paying job, rented a tiny apartment, and kept my head down, but I was planning. Every spare moment, every sleepless night, I was learning. Business, marketing, finance, entrepreneurship. I devoured books and courses while they assumed I was wasting my life. They thought I was drifting. What I was really doing was building. It started small. A side hustle no one believed in, an idea they mocked when they found out. I remember my brother laughing when I mentioned it over lunch one day. He leaned back in his chair, smug as always, and said, "That's cute. A little hobby to keep you busy while the grown-ups work." I smiled and stayed quiet, but inside, I promised myself I'd make him eat those words. I poured everything I had into that business. I worked 17-hour days, skipped holidays, lived like a ghost. I was broke, exhausted, and terrified half the time, but I refused to give up. Every time I heard my father's voice in my head telling me I'd never make it, it fueled me. Years passed. I built connections, learned how to scale, and slowly started making real money. It wasn't flashy at first, but I was growing while they weren't paying attention. The family business was comfortable, but stagnant. They were stuck in their old ways, convinced they were untouchable, while I was learning to play a new game. When I finally hit my first million in profit, I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted to wait until the perfect moment. And that moment came sooner than I expected. The family business started to struggle. They were blindsided by changing markets and technology they didn't understand. Suddenly, my golden boy brother was scrambling, and my father was stressed. I heard through a mutual connection that they were looking for investors, desperate to save the company. I stayed quiet, biding my time. Then I got a call from my brother. He actually had the nerve to ask me if I knew anyone who'd be willing to buy them out. He tried to play it cool, but I could hear the panic in his voice. That was the moment I knew I'd won. I arranged a meeting, and they had no idea they were sitting down with me. When I walked into that boardroom, the looks on their faces were priceless. My father's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and my brother's arrogance cracked instantly. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I simply laid out my terms. I would buy the business outright. I'd save them from total collapse, but I would be the one in control. It was either that, or they'd lose everything. Watching them squirm was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. These were the people who had told me I was nothing, who had laughed at me, dismissed me, and made me feel like I didn't belong. Now they had no choice but to hand over the very thing they'd lorded over me for years. My brother couldn't even look me in the eye, and my father's pride was shattered. He tried to negotiate, but I was calm, firm, and relentless. This wasn't revenge in the loud, dramatic sense. This was quiet, calculated justice. I signed the papers, and just like that, I owned the company that had once been their empire. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the symbolism. I walked into the office the next day, and every employee who had watched my family treat me like a joke now saw me sitting at the head of the table. My father avoided me for weeks. My brother pretended it didn't bother him, but I could feel the resentment radiating off him every time we crossed paths. And I just kept building. I modernized the company, restructured everything, and within a year, it was more successful than it had ever been. People often ask me if I ever threw it in their faces, if I ever rubbed it in. The truth is, I didn't have to. The silence was louder than any words I could have said. The looks in their eyes every time they saw me thriving spoke volumes. I wasn't their forgettable child anymore. I wasn't the weak link in the family. I was the one who had outgrown them all. The best part, I never did it for their approval. I stopped craving that a long time ago. I did it for myself, to prove to the kid who used to lie awake at night feeling worthless that he was capable of more than anyone imagined. This wasn't just revenge, it was freedom. So if you've ever been underestimated, if anyone's ever told you that you weren't enough, let me tell you something, that feeling can either crush you or it can become your greatest weapon. I chose to let it fuel me. And now, every time I walk into that office, every time I sign a deal, I remember the boy they thought would never make it. I remember the words my father said to me, and I smile, because I know I proved him wrong. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite revenge story, and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't.